certainly does fly when you're having fun. Once again, I got engrossed in some article I was reading, and I thought I had another 5 or 6 minutes. Right. Okay, it is now 9:07, and welcome to the Charles Freedman radio program, which is proceeding on schedule at a minute late. Thank you very much for forbearing my absence yesterday. Everything went swimmingly, and I'm back, and no harm, no foul. It is Wednesday. 3 hours of news talk dead ahead, and as usual, your phone calls welcome. 831-265-5050 is the number to call to make that happen. The romantic songs best, don't you? Okay, and we will do a quick fade there. Thank you, Erskine Hawkins, for once again providing us with impeccable theme music for this program, which beats the living. Yeah, in one respect, this is the finest radio program on the air. Nobody has a better theme song than I do. Nobody. Okay, let's see what we can do here. First of all, let's get the phones cranked up because somebody might want to call. And if they do, oh, you're not going to hand me that jazz, are you? Okay, hang on. Gotta start again. There we are. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we're all set. Okay, very good. Nothing. Did anything much happen yesterday? Well, we have actually a few stories, some large, some small. The Trump administration has been somewhat embarrassed by the antics of one Paul Ingrassia. Mr. Ingrassia had a nomination to be, let me see, what was it? Senate confirmation to lead a White House ethics watchdog office. His move came after Republican senators voiced opposition. It became clear he had no path to confirmation. Why would they have done that? What was the issue? Well, it appears that Mr. Ingrassia's tendencies to mouth off online produce some things that simply wouldn't pass muster. At least 4 Republican senators have come out against confirming Paul Ingrassia to lead the Office of Special Counsel after the publication of odious text messages he apparently sent. Beyond the failure of vetting, it would be useful if President Trump made clear that this kind of garbage isn't wanted in his movement. Mr. Ingrassia's messages were obtained and posted by Politico. We haven't independently verified them, but here are some of his remarks. Never trust a Chinaman or an Indian. We need competent white men in positions of leadership. Martin Luther King Jr. was the 1960s George Floyd, and his holiday should be ended and tossed into the seventh circle of hell. I do have a Nazi streak in me from time to time. I will admit it. Now, is there anything there, any one of those that you can see yourself posting online? No. Not only because you have better sense, but because your mind doesn't operate this way. Remember the words of Brother Dave Gardner. I don't have to be careful. I don't have to watch what I say. I just have to watch what I think. If you don't think this way, and this is a perverse way, then you're not going to say things like this. Mr. Ingrassia also reported criticized Turning Point USA, that Charlie Kirk's outfit, for kicking the anti-Semitic Nick Fuentes out of an event. So Turning Point USA understood that there are certain, you're entitled to your views. You have your First Amendment rights. Not on my dime. This is my event. If you want to promote that nonsense, do it someplace else. There's the door. Here's your hat. What's your hurry? A lawyer for Mr. Ingrassia told the news outlet he didn't concede the veracity of the leaked messages. Arguendo, even if the texts are authentic, he said. The arguendo, I guess it is, they are clearly read as self-deprecating and satirical humor, making fun of the facts that liberals outlandishly and routinely call MAGA supporters Nazis. It's impossible to know what's in his heart, but his explanation is that he acted like an internet troll isn't much of a defense. Other participants in the chat offered warnings. Paul, you're coming across as a white nationalist, one reportedly said. You're going to be in private practice one day, and this excrement will be around forever. The same advice could have been given to all of those young Republican leaders whose chat thread recently leaked. They embarrassed themselves and the Republican Party by making racist remarks and joking about gas chambers. The New York State Republican Party disbanded its young Republican group as a result. The internet is full of personalities, some of them prominent, who seek attention by pushing the edges of political discourse. Was Churchill the bad guy in World War II? Just asking questions, folks. The worry is that young MAGA Republicans imbibe this stuff and think it's a model for how to act in the real world. President Trump could be a counterweight if he pointed out that he has Jewish grandchildren and doesn't find Nazis especially amusing. The demise of Mr. Ingrassia's nomination would show the GOP won't tolerate his brand of extremist political behavior and rhetoric. It could also be a potent lesson for MAGA youth in what not to do. Is this a generational thing? There's a picture of Paul Ingrassia here. He's a lot younger than I am. Needless to say, we see a lot more of this inflamed behavior on the left than on the right. But the idea that it could leak through even to people who are conservatives, and for conservatives, another word, traditionalists, people who, at any rate, are expected to understand how to behave. Well, I don't know. At times like this, I'm an old fogey. I feel my fogiest when I'm talking about things like this. Because I'm sure there's some young MAGA hothead out there right now saying, "Oh, Charles, you're so 20th century." If that's the case, then I wear it with pride. Because, frankly, the idea that this type of inflamed rhetoric passes for everyday expression, I find concerning. We have our first phone call. And I'm going to find out what Evan has to say. Whoop, there we go. That's the place we want it. And good morning. Hello.
Good morning. Glad to hear you, for sure. Anyway, I'd love to keep on track with your topic. Paul who? The last name kind of, I can't get last names great.
Ingrassia.
Yes, sir. It's kind of frightening to me. So he was going to be, in charge of the Office of Special Counsel, right?
I think it's Office of Special Counsel. That's another thing. The Office of Special, in my world, the Office of Special Counsel wouldn't exist. If I were the president, I would wave my arm and I would do away with it. I wouldn't appoint anybody.
Well, I just find it interesting where, isn't it supposed to be some form of independent watchdog? Is that what it's called?
I
Is it
guess
supposed to
so.
be independent?
I'm not entirely positive. Complete. Phew, let me try that again. I'm not entirely sure about that, although that seems reasonable. Again, one of the things I have a problem with are these ambiguous portfolios that seem to mean whatever you want them to mean on any given morning. Again,
Well,
my idea would be abolish this position. Don't have it.
I understand. Yeah, no. But, here's the thing is I just find it interesting where we have to have presidential nominees in these um, special councils or whatever, where they're supposed to be, I guess, independent, but they're really not when they're being, some of our presidents are being nominated. Your thoughts, sir, on that?
Well, we've had a textbook example or a course case of that over the last few years with Merrick Garland and Mr. Obama, Mr. Biden, and their use of
The judicial system,
justice,
for sure.
the Justice Department. No, not the judicial system. That's a separate branch of government.
I'm sorry.
The
Yes.
Justice Department and the intelligence services to gin up nonsense. I mean, the whole Russia hoax. Yeah, Donald Trump's in cahoots with Vladimir Putin. This is a bigger story, I think, than Watergate ever was. Oh, that's right. You're not old enough to remember Watergate. Oh, crime and Edleys. Well, if you've never read about it or heard about it, a president had to resign as a result of this. So it's big stuff. A guy got thrown out of office, going to be impeached and convicted. What happened? People in his employ broke into the offices of the Democratic National Committee in the middle of the night to seek political intelligence. They did this without the knowledge of the president in question, certainly not at his orders, but they were working for people who were working for him. So there was there were some degrees of separation there. Nixon read about the break-in in the morning papers the same way the rest of us did. Nixon's mistake was in standing by his people, being loyal and trying to essentially cover up what had been done. And in the course of this, he abused the prerogatives of his office. For that, he was going to be impeached and convicted. In the case of the Russia hoax, we have people in, again, the Justice Department and in the national security areas who, from what I can gather, at least with the knowledge of the chief executive at that time, perhaps not at his behest, but with his knowledge, weaponized their agencies in an effort to manufacture false narratives and to enshrine false evidence in an effort to smear a political opponent with basically a treasonous accusation. Here's somebody being in cahoots with Russia. My God, that's pretty big stuff. So I have a story that I'm going to share later on. John Brennan, one of the principal architects of this atrocity, has now been recommended for prosecution by a congressional committee, and we'll talk about that. But
well, please do. I'm going to let you go, sir. Thank you for the time, for sure. And I got my answers from you.
Okay.
And thank you so much. You have a great rest of your Wednesday, sir.
Well, have a good day then. Appreciate the call. The idea, I guess what Evan wanted to get at was, that somebody who's in a position like this Office of Special Counsel, should be, what do you want to say? Ethically besmirched, unchallengeable, or as Eisenhower once said, clean as a hound's tooth. Yeah, I agree with that. You want people of real integrity in these positions. You don't want some clown act who's going around making, shall we say, questionable comments on public media. You want somebody with, at the very least, more sense and better judgment than it takes to do a thing like that. Agree. But I did have the opportunity to say that, so far as I'm concerned, this Office of Special Counsel probably shouldn't exist at all. We don't need it. We have a Justice Department. We have an FBI. If these institutions are effective and staffed by people with integrity, you don't need anything extra. And our experience over the past 30, 40 years with special counsels has been such that I don't feel any great desire to continue it. Okay, it's 23 past. What else we got? Oh, well, let's go ahead with this story about John Brennan because thanks to Evan's call, we briefly touched on it. John Brennan has, he and James Clapper, these are the national security twins of the Obama-Biden administration. I first became acquainted with Mr. Clapper in the very early days of the Obama administration. Mr. Clapper was National Security Advisor to the President. Now, this is the position that Henry Kissinger used to hold in the Nixon administration, so this is big stuff. So this National Security Advisor is testifying before a Senate committee, and a Democratic senator, Ron Wyden of Oregon, who's still in the Senate, asks Clapper, this was back in 2009, 2010, and we were learning that the American government had been surveilling tremendous numbers of our personal communications, telephone calls, emails, etc. And Clapper was asked, have you surveilled, or I can't remember the exact question, I'm paraphrasing here, but have you acquired intelligence on the doings of ordinary citizens? And Clapper denied it. He lied. Because he knew damn well they had. And I remember thinking at the time, well, we've seen the last of that fellow. When you tell that big a whopper to a Senate committee, you're going down, brother. But that didn't happen. That never happened. Rather, instead, Mr. Clapper retained his position and continued to be one of the oracles of policy of the Obama administration. And needless to say, was one of the people who in 2020, when Hunter Biden's laptop with all of its injurious information showed up, he was one of the 51 intelligence and security experts who signed a letter saying that it, quote, had all the earmarks of Russian disinformation. Our own local boy who made good, Leon Panetta, a former CIA director, also put his name to that letter. Now, Leon is a very avuncular guy, likable, smart. But he is also a very brutal partisan. And every once in a while, he steps over the edge, like the time he called for President Reagan to be impeached, and the time he signed that letter. He should have known better. Anyway, John Brennan, who is Mr. Clapper's joined-at-the-hip running mate, this was Joe Biden's CIA director. The House Judiciary Committee has now referred him to the Justice Department for prosecution. Roger Simon writes about Mr. Brennan. My first reaction, what took them so long? And my third, will it hold? All this was within seconds, but I've been wishing Brennan would get his for some time. From Fox's reporting, In a letter to Attorney General Bondi Tuesday, House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan referred former CIA Director John Brennan to the Justice Department for making false statements to Congress. Jordan accused Brennan of lying in his 2023 Judiciary Committee testimony by denying that the CIA had used the Steele dossier in prepping the 2017 intelligence community assessment on Russian election interference, and falsely claiming that CIA opposed including the dossier. So what this amounts to is that 8 years after the fact, someone who perpetrated this atrocity is finally being brought to book for it. There were people who were complaining the Watergate scandal between the initial break-in, which was June, I believe, of 1972. The president was not forced to resign until August of 1974, so 2 years and some odd months went by, and people were complaining about justice being delayed, and why don't they find out what's going on here and let's have accountability. In this particular case, it's been far longer. The biggest difference between the two, incidentally, has not been the question of which party controlled Congress. It hasn't been the question of which party held the White House. The biggest difference has been the Fourth Estate, the media. When Watergate was going on, when Nixon was president, the media were a howling mob, screaming for the president's head on a pike, constantly ridiculing, lampooning, attacking, just a barrage. The problem, of course, was that Nixon had actually handed them the rope in his efforts to shield the men who had been operating in his behalf, not with his knowledge, but in his behalf. He acted improperly. They used that rope and they hanged him. Now, in the case of Mr. Trump, he's accused of a collusion with Russia. The problem is, in this particular case, Mr. Trump gave them no rope. He did not collude with Russia. He is not an agent of Vladimir Putin, as some Democrats have cheerfully claimed. When we had a special investigator, a special counsel in the Watergate era, continual new developments surfaced from time to time, delayed by the tactics of President Nixon and the people who worked for him. That's where I first heard the term stonewalling. The president and his people put up a stone wall. We're going to keep these people from finding out what they want to find out. Well, of course, over time, these secrets did trickle out. The information did become known. The equivalence in our own day is the Mueller investigation into Mr. Trump's alleged dalliances with the Russians. And we all know that after expense of tens of millions of dollars and with the diligent efforts of scores of highly motivated and Trump-loathing employees and experts, they came up empty because there was nothing there. There comes a time at which producing, fake evidence simply isn't an option anymore. If Mueller and his people thought they could have gotten away with that, maybe they would have. I don't know. But they at least deserve credit for not having done so. They didn't even try. They did not attempt to produce fake evidence. They simply came forward and said, I'm sorry, we've spent all this time, we've looked everywhere, and it ain't there. Now, ever since then, and that was what, 6 years ago, ever since then, there have been those of us who've wondered, well, what about this mess that was created? What about the time that was wasted? What about the government resources that were wasted? What about the damage done to an American administration charged with running the country? What about all of this? Maybe we're finally going to get an answer to that. I'll give you a little more on Mr. Brennan in a moment. Right now it's a little past half past. So let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. The telephone number to reach the program is 831-265-5050.
With a little help from our friends, Santa Cruz Voice would like to rent or lease an office in Mid-County or thereabouts for our hosts and their VIP guests to conduct interviews. We are looking for 200 square feet, give or take, with secure access, and are willing to share with an existing business that has an extra office to rent. If you know of such a space, please let us know at info@santacruzvoice.com. That's info@santacruzvoice.com. And thank you for being a friend.
Attention content producers. You can have access to a complete digital media production facility at Satellite Co-working and Digital Media Studio on Soquel Avenue. Easily rent video and audio equipment, a studio with green screen, editing suite, and audio booth, all at can't say no rates. Schedule a tour to see for yourself at satellitecoworking.com. Mention Santa Cruz Voice for 20% off your first reservation.
The wife says the boat's got to go, no problem. Stored at Anbar Self-Storage in U-Haul, easy off Highway 1 by the airport. 24-hour security for cars, boats, and RVs. Stored away at Anbar Self-Storage in U-Haul in Freedom.
You made the products, now you have to deliver. Anbar Self-Storage and U-Haul has the moving vans, shipping boxes, and packing materials you need to deliver them. Easy off Highway 1 on Airport Boulevard by the airport. Anbar Self-Storage and U-Haul in Freedom.
Get hooked up with affordable cannabis at your neighborhood Hook Outlet dispensary. We have locations in Santa Cruz, Capitola, and Watsonville. At each Hook Outlet, you will find unmatched low prices on the Hook's unparalleled selection of top-quality medical and recreational cannabis flower, vapes, drinks, gummies, and concentrates. The Hook Outlets are Santa Cruz County's best source for the finest cannabis at the lowest prices. See for yourself. Stop by any Hook Outlet and say hi. We'll see you there. HookOutlet.com.
Okay, you are in tune with SantaCruzVoice.com, the Charles Freedman radio program. News talk from 9 to noon every weekday. It is at present 9:30. We are just getting started. We're learning a little more about John Brennan, the man who was CIA director for Joe Biden and who is, to be quite blunt, up to his ears in outrageous activities using his positions of trust to prosecute false narratives and to essentially weaponize the apparatus of the government against political enemies. This was what Richard Nixon had to resign his office for. And again, Nixon created this reality himself. Among other things, Richard Nixon maintained an enemies list. This presently became published, and people who were on it wore it as a badge of pride. I'm officially regarded by Nixon as an enemy. Wow, hot stuff. I remember a few years later, President Reagan took office, and a Democratic friend of mine said, he's just another Nixon. I said, oh yeah? Can you imagine Ronald Reagan maintaining an enemies list? And to give him credit, my friend broke into laughter, because obviously that simply was not something that could be imagined. This is one of the reasons why, as a president, Richard Nixon failed and Ronald Reagan so brilliantly succeeded. It has nothing to do with politics, does it? It's altogether possible for a person on the left to be vindictive. Matter of fact, it's just as destructive a trait no matter who evidences it. So who is this John Brennan? He is accused of lying to Congress, and Roger Simon, who has evidently known him a long time, says, for the foregoing, it should be obvious I'm no fan of Brennan. It's always been a mystery to me how such a person became CIA director. How, with his background, he could even be a member of our intelligence community. My concern goes back a long time. In some small way, Brennan and I are brothers. We were both schoolboy leftists. We were brothers from another mother. I was a pretend semi-leftist of the typical Hollywood ilk. He was a serious leftist, for real as you can get. Stalin real. How do I know? Well, I had a lot of friends on the so-called left in the late 60s and 70s who were devotees of the Students for a Democratic Society, the SDS. And its leader, Tom Hayden, author of the Port Huron Statement, which abjured Stalinism and instead advocated democratic socialism. That sound familiar nowadays? Thinking back on those days, it was pretty embarrassing. We would hang out at Tom Hayden and Jane Fonda's small cottage in Santa Monica, listening to Tom Hayden pontificate. At the same time, Jane walked around with a laundry basket, ostentatiously showing off her working-class bona fides. A few years later, she was living with Ted Turner in one of the country's largest mansions. Brennan was different. He was the only person I ever heard of who actually voted for a Communist Party presidential candidate. This was Gus Hall. Gus Hall was no Gus Hall was an ultra neo-Stalinist hardliner. He despised the Hayden Fonda types as softies. He frequently traveled to Moscow to receive Brezhnev prizes from the Soviet dictator, even supported the 1968 Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia, the one that shut down the Prague Spring. Again, you younger people, when you hear me mention things like this, it's difficult for me to stop and give the history of every one of them in the course of a peroration. I tend to do that to some extent. It causes my presentations to wander. I get caught in this cul-de-sac or that cul-de-sac. I would urge you, if you have a curious mind, when I talk of the Prague Spring, of an American Communist Party leader who endorsed the Soviet occupation of Czechoslovakia in 1968, take a few minutes, go on. It's easier to do this now than it was years ago. It used to be, I have to go to the library, or I have to ask some old guy. Nowadays, you can just go online and type in Prague Spring. Hey, just for the hell of it, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Okay. Praguespring. Boom. Okay, what do we got? A period of political liberalization and mass protest in Czechoslovakia began 5 January 19... Okay, so you can get it easy enough. The Prague Spring, basically enough, there was a Communist Party leader in Czechoslovakia was one of the countries that the Soviets did not withdraw from at the end of World War II. They said they were going to. They said, okay, well, we'll pull the Red Army back. This is what they lied about at Yalta and Potsdam. This is why conservatives for years have made sport of FDR and Truman, because they essentially allowed Stalin to pull the wool over their eyes. So what's done is done. The Red Army remains in these countries of Eastern Europe, and they become what's called satellite states of the Soviet Union. In essence, they are incorporated into the Soviet Union. They become the Soviet. Russia extends all the way to the West German border. It's difficult for you to comprehend that big a Russian empire. That's what Vladimir Putin is trying to reestablish right now. That's why he's fighting a war in Ukraine. This is the next step on next we have to get back the Baltic states, and we have to get back Poland, and we have to get back Romania, and all these. He's got a lot to do. But Ukraine is next on his list. The Russians don't give up. whether they're calling themselves communists or Russian nationalists. That's what Putin calls them. Look at the map and you'll see the story. Anyway, be that as it may. In 1968, a Communist Party leader in Czechoslovakia, Alexander Dubček, began to attempt to liberalize the government and society in Czechoslovakia to allow more freedom of speech, to allow a little bit more freedom of enterprise. In other words, to relax the totalitarian control of Communist Party administration. This did not go over well in Moscow. To make a long story short, the Red Army, the Soviet Red Army, promptly appeared on the scene. Mr. Dubček was relieved of his party positions, and the lid was clamped firmly back on. The world watched this at the time with dismay. There was nothing anyone could do. Nobody was about to go to war with the Soviet Union to try to preserve a free Czechoslovakia. It simply wasn't going to happen that way. They had too many nuclear weapons and they were far too nasty. So this is one of those instances in history where the bad guys won, big time. And all anybody could do was view with alarm and scream and yell. Or you could do what Gus Hall did and say, hey, this is wonderful. I think it's great. I leave it to you, what you would have done. Okay, so side trip over with. Not too many people knew about Gus Hall then. Brennan clearly did. He said he had backed Hall through youthful ignorance, an excuse hard to accept unless, of course, you are Barack Obama, who later made Brennan chief of the CIA and had his own version of Gus Hall in Frank Marshall Davis. Years later, it was said that Brennan, who spent a good deal of time in the Middle East, skip that one. What we do know is that Brennan was one of 51 current and past intelligence agents who signed the infamous letter claiming that the Hunter Biden laptop was likely Russian disinformation. Nearly 100% of signatories of that letter must have known they were lying at the time unless they were blithering idiots. There is no other excuse. That was just nonsense. The House Judiciary Committee and Jim Jordan may have the goods on Brennan, lying, making false statements in the parlance, to the committee regarding the even more infamous Steele dossier. Brennan asserted he never supported the dossier as evidence. Documents apparently declassified in 2025 assert just the opposite and show the former CIA director insisting the agency use the blatant fabrication as evidence, anything to get Trump and his allies. The question remains whether the Department of Justice will be able to secure a conviction against this highly slippery character who has been lawyered up on this and other matters for some time. It's easy to be skeptical, but in this case especially, it would be delightful to be proven wrong. Lastly, why do I see Brennan as the epitome of evil? It's something in my gut. Remember, the person who you're reading here, this is Roger Simon, is the author of this. It's something in my gut, but it also makes me reflect on the famous warning, this you probably have heard of, Senator Chuck Schumer. Just as Donald Trump was entering the presidency for the first time back in January of 2017, Senator Schumer said, let me tell you, you take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday of getting back at you. Do you remember that? I do. And so does Roger Simon. The warning curdled my blood then, and it does now. Can you imagine having the FBI and the CIA out to get you? Movies are made about things like this. Television series are made about things like this. The impossible position you're put in if agencies of this kind of capability and this kind of institutional power decide that you are on their excrement list, you got a problem. When I first visited CIA headquarters in Langley, the very size of the institution made me suspicious. Was this an intelligence agency or something different? An alternative nation of some sort, whatever it was. It was a truly immense bureaucracy of the kind for which self-preservation is often the greatest motive. Will they find 6 ways to Sunday to save Brennan, or will justice prevail? No case before the Department of Justice will be more important. I tend to agree with that. I have seen a number of analyses, not just one or two, but a number, that point to the Russia hoax and its perpetration and the weaponization of CIA and FBI for political purposes as worse, bigger, more important, more significant, more heinous than anything that went on in the Watergate era. Again, I keep having to remind myself there are so many people, most people who vote in elections nowadays, Watergate is something they read about in the history books. And if they do, they probably don't read a very detailed account. It's certainly not like those of us who were alive at the time and who saw the story unfold over a period of over 2 years in daily releases through the newspapers or statements by the president when he would issue this defense or take that legal tactic to try to shield himself and his operatives from being brought to account. It was a terrible period. The fabric of American government, the fabric of our republic, was tested as severely as it has ever been. And of course, this was going on against a background of incredible domestic violence. We talked about that, a couple of days ago on the program, how many bombings there were going on in those days. The Weather Underground was running around blowing up everything under the sun. People who see the 2020s as a violent time never lived through the 60s, which extended, of course, into the early 70s. Came to a crescendo during the Nixon years. It was violent, it was bloody. I'm sitting here. I pause for a moment. My mind is just racing. All these images are going by like this at the speed of light, and I'm recalling them from 40, 50 years ago. But the memories are very fresh. Oh, well, at least I know that I'm not suffering from dementia yet. I'm Charles Freedman. 10 minutes remaining in this particular hour. If you have something you'd like to get off your chest or put on mine, 831-265-5050 is the telephone number, 831-265-5050. Let's look into something else during the final 10 minutes before the top of the hour. I mentioned earlier that the major difference between then and now is the media. The media was absolutely baying for Nixon's scalp. Today, the same media, if they adopted the same attitude towards the Obama and Biden administrations that they did towards the Nixon administration, then these malefactions, these misappropriations of government agencies, etc., a light would have been shined on these a long time ago. As it is now, it requires congressional majorities, and even when such an important thing as this, like John Brennan being referred for prosecution, you're hearing about it here, but you probably didn't get the story in any news source you read, because if they do print it, they put it on page 17 underneath a lingerie ad, and you don't notice it. Our media needs a complete culture change, and Gerard Baker points it out. For a glimpse into the sealed world of the establishment media, nothing tops Pauline Kael's famous observation after we're going back to the Nixon years again, the 1972 presidential election. Basically what she said was, she lives in this insular world in Manhattan. She says, I don't understand how Nixon got elected. I don't know anybody who voted for him. But Gerard Baker goes a little deeper. It isn't quite true, as lore has it, that Pauline Kael was so unaware of her Himalayan elevation above her fellow Americans that she wondered aloud how Richard Nixon could possibly have won because she didn't know anyone who had voted for him. In fact, her full quote was more guileful than that, and all the more revealing. This is what she actually said. I live in a rather special world. I know only one person who voted for Nixon. Where they are, I don't know. They're outside my ken, but sometimes when I'm in a theater, I can feel them. Less an ingenious revelation of lofty self-insulation from such voters, more a conscious repining at their existence, mixed with revulsion at the thought that she occasionally had to share space with them. This Marie Antoinette-level empathy for how other people live and think has been the biggest problem with what we continue to call elite news media over the past 30 years. It is the primary reason that trust in their reliability as providers of a fair accounting of news has collapsed. Contrary to the fevered imaginations of MAGA partisans, editors and reporters and anchors do not sit around concocting leftist talking points, checking in from time to time with the Democratic National Committee and handing out the approved line to take on all the important topics. It's more organic than that. The people who have held the commanding heights of news, from editors down to reporters, may not be quite Kael-esque in their remoteness from their less refined fellow citizens, but their philosophical outlook reflects a degree of convergence in their shared, metropolitan, expensively educated, narrowly focused minds. The political implications of this institutional demography have become more pronounced in the age of Donald Trump, while the more open-minded of such people might once have reluctantly acknowledged that George Bush or Mitt Romney at least had a right to be considered for the office of president. In Mr. Trump's case, from day one, his illegitimacy was never in doubt. Often, as I've dealt with mainstream journalists over the past 10 years, I've asked myself, how many of them voted for Trump? Realizing the answer was scarcely ever more than one, I moved to the more interesting corollary. How many of them even know someone who voted for Trump? All this makes me a little skeptical about the valiant attempt now underway to unwind decades of mainstream journalistic bias by management fiat. While news organizations are in many ways top-down, newspaper editors exercise an autocracy quite rare in other fields. In reality, they are bottom-up. Their product shaped by those who wield the pens. That American media is now going through a revolution is not in doubt. For those of us who spent decades railing at and occasionally even trying to redress the imbalance, this should be exhilarating. The appointment of Barry Weiss, once of these pages, and of the New York Times opinion section, as editor-in-chief of CBS News, and the New York network parent company's pricey acquisition of her Free Press Media project is a welcome change. So too is Jeff Bezos' attempted reorientation of the Washington Post editorial page to a more pro-American tilt. Similar efforts are underway in other news media. Neither Ms. Weiss nor any of the people involved in other efforts are right-wing propagandists. For the most part, they are thoughtful, honest journalists, intent on restoring high standards and pushing the pendulum back a little toward the plumb line. But the sheer horizontal and vertical reach of the leftist mindset in newsrooms, the entrenched nature of their ideological skew, will militate against a successful resetting of the compass. And there's another concern. If these changes are merely the result of opportunistic business leaders eager to curry favor with a president unusually active in wanting to direct media coverage, well, it won't work. There's enough cynicism in the news as it is. If the objective of reforming newsrooms is perceived as to simply reshaping them into outlets disposed favorably to Donald Trump, it will only calcify the mistrust people already have. It isn't true that trust in media has simply collapsed across the board. Instead, it's become partisan. Consumers trust only what they already believe, which is no form of trust at all. Without structural change, a repopulation of the demographically, educationally, geographically sealed units that these places have become, real change is improbable. That change is harder still in organizations rooted in old forms of pre-digital content delivery. Changing form and content at the same time is Herculean. Still, we should wish them luck, and by we, I don't mean only conservatives. I mean everyone who has an interest in fair, honest, and objective news, and information as the means by which people are informed about the government and the way they hold the powerful accountable. I recently saw that the reform of newsrooms is going to have to be a generational thing. The Reaper will march through claiming a generation of leftist flatheads, hopefully to be replaced not by right-wing flatheads, but by professional journalists who are virtually an extinct species today. Well, there have been other examples of extinct species, carefully nurtured, who have come back from the brink of extinction. Recently, I was amused by watching a piece in the front page of the Santa Cruz Sentinel, an aggressive sea otter off Steamer Lane actually became rather forward toward a surfer, seized the surfboard, and promptly sat on it and remained there for the next 20 minutes until some lifeguard types went out and shooed it away. When I was a young man, the sea otter, the California sea otter, was regarded as a lost species. There were only a few examples left. Today, their population is once again thriving. If it can happen in the wild, surely among intelligent human beings, it can also, and indeed human beings enabled the recovery of the sea otter by protecting and keeping the last few from being slain. Perhaps the same thing will happen in our newsrooms. It's 10 o'clock. I'll be back in 6 minutes. Okay. Zippity-doo-dah. Mm-hmm. Okay, good morning once again. It is now 10:06. Hour number 2 of today's Charles Freedman program is now beginning. The telephone number remains 831-265-5050. I would be happy to hear from you. Don't hesitate to call in and offer your ideas. One of our Incidentally, I'll go ahead and give my email address, as I sometimes do, because there are people out there who find it inconvenient or sometimes impossible to call in, but you can always send an email, charles78rpm@yahoo.com. Once again, email charles78rpm@yahoo.com. Okay. We have received a communication from Evan. He calls too. Anyway, an article in, it says RT. Well, I dug up the article. What's RT? RT, question more. What does RT stand for? Let's find out if we possibly can. RT. Okay, all they give us is RT. Right time. I have no idea. So anyway, this is an online article, Why Western Conservative Parties Are Doomed. The article argues that mainstream conservative parties in the West are in long-term decline. It claims they've lost their ideological distinctiveness, failed to deliver on promises, and are being displaced by populist and nationalist movements that present themselves as the true opposition. And the article points specifically to Great Britain and Australia. Now, I'm not as familiar as I am as with the Australian situation as I am with the British. At present, the coming movement in Britain is a new party that didn't even exist a few years ago. It's called Reform. Reform UK, the United Kingdom. And the leader of this party is a fellow named Nigel Farage. Now, unlike the Reform Party, Nigel Farage has been around for years. Very much a known quantity in British politics. Years ago, he was dismissed as a conservative gadfly. And indeed, he was a member of the Conservative Party. But the Conservative Party really didn't pay much attention to him. He was arguing that, border security was important and that a flood of uncontrolled immigration into Great Britain would not be a good thing, would be damaging. Since that time, it turned out that Nigel Farage was basically prescient. And the Conservative Party, which held power from, 2010 until 2024, so 14 years, the Conservative Party was in power. During this period of time, their administration was anything but impressive. During that period, I believe they went through something like half a dozen prime ministers, one of whom was only in office for a month. Now, they did manage to come up with one charismatic and impressive leader, a man named Boris Johnson, who led them to their last election victory, and it was a very convincing one. Out of a 650-seat parliament, they wound up with something like 370 seats, a solid majority, certainly enough to govern. But unfortunately, Boris Johnson, although he had been an effective campaigner and vote winner, once he got into office, did not produce good results. It's really too bad. Years ago, the Conservative Party produced Margaret Thatcher, who led them to 3, some might even say 4 election victories, because in the election after she was deposed, the Conservatives still managed to win a majority, even with her successor standing on her shoulders. So the Conservatives knew what a winning approach to government looked like. Good for the Conservative Party, good for Great Britain, good for the people. So if you've got this blueprint that works, you follow it, right? No. The British Conservative Party had always had a significant number of members who had no use for Mrs. Thatcher. This is going to sound funny, but bear in mind this is the Conservative Party. She's just too conservative. Well, this is a conservative party, isn't it? Well, not that conservative. But she was outrageously successful. 3 election victories. 2 of them with parliamentary margins of over 100 seats. This was an electoral record of success that Winston Churchill came nowhere near. The first time he led the British Conservative Party into a national election, he got his head handed to him. Not Mrs. Thatcher. She led the Conservatives through 3 campaigns, and she won, and she won, and she won. And Great Britain the sick man of Europe, came back to life. Well, if you want a recipe for irrelevance, take a party that has somebody like this, a fantastically successful person like this, and you just ignore them. Bury them in the past. And, oh, who was that? We don't remember her. And that's what you get, the modern Conservative Party. Well, no wonder. In the last election, they got their heads handed to them. And it's interesting that the beneficiaries, where do the votes go? If the Conservatives won in 2000 and lost in 2024, well, their vote must have gone down, which it did. Well, who won the election? The Labour Party. Well, their vote must have gone up. No, it didn't. No, it didn't. A Labour Party that was drubbed in 2020 won 33% of the national vote. The Labour Party that wound up with a 400-plus seat majority in Commons last year took 33% of the national vote. So I can see you scratching your head wondering, how in the hell does that work? Well, a third party came along. In 2020, Nigel Farage stood down. There were people urging him then to oppose the Conservatives and to stand up a party like Reform UK. Farage said no. No, we'll let the Conservatives win this election and see what they do. We'll give them a shot. This was after the Conservatives had already been in power for 9 years and had not done well. So Mr. Farage and his supporters were exceptionally patient and forbearing. And the Conservatives had one last opportunity to actually produce effective Conservative government for the country, to close down the illegal crossings of the English Channel, to do away with the net zero nonsense and take their foot off the neck of British industry and the British working class, who depend on British industry for jobs. None of this would the Conservatives do. So finally, last year, Nigel Farage stood up the Reform Party. Now, the Reform Party is where the Conservative voters went to. Oh, not all of them. At that time, it was a very new party. Most Conservative voters stayed with the Tories. But if their vote collapsed from, say, 40% down to 25%, all of a sudden in district after district where they had come out with the highest number of votes, now they're running number 2. And Labour, with the same number of votes they had 4 years ago, is suddenly winning scores and scores of seats. Bear in mind, in Great Britain, you have individual constituencies, each electing a member, and the one who was elected is the one with the most votes. It's very simple. You don't need a majority. So if there are 6 candidates running, the highest vote getter might wind up with 28%, but you got more than anybody else, so you get elected. Very simple. You can argue whether you like it or not, but it's certainly easily understood and easily applied, which is why 650 districts, the day after the election, everybody knows who won. All the votes are counted, and it's done. There's a certain elegance to it. But of course, it means that if a party does not deliver effective government, and a new party stands up and says, hey, vote for us, we'll get it right. If a significant number of their supporters, in this particular case Conservative supporters, leave that party and go to the new party, well, there goes your election. Since that time, it's only been a little over a year since that election, so Labour takes over. Now they've got a chance. And if anything, they have been more stumble-footed than the Tories were. And so Mr. Farage and his Conservatives and his reformists are simply saying, look, these two traditional parties, Labor and the Conservatives, they're Tweedledum and Tweedledummer. Neither of them understand what the people want or need. Neither of them are willing to bring reform to the United Kingdom. We will. If an election were held in the UK right now, a new general election, now reform is sitting at about 35% of the vote. The Conservatives have collapsed, and Labor has lost a significant portion of its support as well. Bear in mind, there are a lot of Labor voters who would never, ever, ever vote Conservative, but who might conceivably vote Reform. It's an argument that, as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking of Tom Campbell, a Republican for many years, served in the California legislature and the federal Congress as a Republican. A couple of years ago, I received a communication from him. He's starting a new party called the Common Sense Party. The idea being that people might not want to vote for a Republican, but they might vote for somebody with common sense. What does this look like in real terms? Now, this third party, this Common Sense Party, has gotten no traction at all. In California, you have to have a certain number of people register with your party for it to get representation in ballot position. The Common Sense Party has not been able to do that. But what have we seen in the real world? I think it was just a few days ago I was talking about the new mayor of San Francisco, Daniel Lurie, who is proceeding to turn the city around. Daniel Lurie is a Republican mayor. You say, wait a minute, Daniel Lurie isn't a Republican, he's a Democrat. I understand that. But he was elected to succeed a left-wing, loony left, ditzy progressive mayor, and he ran as the antithesis of that. In San Francisco today, the Republican Party label is radioactive. It was, 25 years ago, there was Anne Marie Conroy. That was her name. I was wondering if I'd come up with it. Anne Marie Conroy was a member, one of the members of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, which I believe has, I think it's 15 members elected from districts around the city. It's a 4-year term, and Ms. Conroy, who had been serving with distinction and effectiveness, ran for re-election. It became a big thing. Anne Marie Conroy is a Republican. We can't possibly vote for a Republican. Ms. Conroy lost her seat on the Board of Supervisors. Not because she'd been ineffective or dishonest or anything else, simply because she was registered as a Republican. So in San Francisco today, if you want to be elected, you cannot run as a Republican. So what did Daniel Lurie do? He's a Democrat, of course, but he ran as a Republican. He ran promising clean, safe streets and economic development for the city of San Francisco. That's a Republican platform. And he got elected in San Francisco. They elected this Republican. So, of course, the thing that we're left with in city after city is that the Republican label at present is so badly tarnished, damaged, whatever you want to say, that the only way a Republican can run and win is by becoming a Democrat. There's a fellow, Rick Caruso, you may have heard of him. In the last election for mayor of Los Angeles, he ran against Karen Bass, didn't win. Since that time, he has left the Republican Party, become a Democrat. Now he is flirting with the idea of running for governor of California. His politics haven't changed, but he is evidently politically ambitious and understands that if he wants to get elected in California, he'll have to do it as a Democrat because people won't vote for anybody who says they're a Republican. This may change. Political labels have recovered from this type of ignominy before. And frankly, I think one of the things it would take is somebody like me to come along and say, hey, you elected this guy, Daniel Lurie, mayor of San Francisco. He says he's a Democrat, but look what he's doing. He's cleaning up the outdoor drug marts. He's getting the homeless off the streets. He's backing the San Francisco Police Department, increasing their budget, working to raise their morale so that they are better able to do their job of providing a clean, safe environment for the people of San Francisco to go about their daily business in. Those are Republican policies. He's a Republican mayor. He's a mayor like George Christopher, who was the last registered Republican to hold that office. So thank you very much, Evan, for this piece. Western conservative parties will have trouble if they fail to be conservative. This was what happened to the British Tories. In America, the Republican Party essentially stands convicted of somewhat of the same thing. We had a towering figure in Ronald Reagan who showed us tremendous success, 2 landslide elections as president, and his successor, a Republican successor, elected, the only third term for a political party in post-World War II American history. Ronald Reagan, by any rational measure, the most successful American politician since the end of World War II. And let's have no driveling about Donald Trump. Reagan is the gold standard. So what happened? Well, as soon as Reagan leaves office, we put into office a guy who never cared for him, who called his economic policies voodoo economics, and who, when the time came, actually urged Ukraine to remain part of the Russian Empire rather than indulge its aspirations for national independence. He gave the speech in Ukraine, it might be noted, in their capital, Kiev. It was dubbed the Chicken Kiev speech, not one of George Bush's best moments. And in the time since then, who have we nominated for president? Bob Dole, who was, well, let's just be gentle and say past his sell-by date. Bush Jr., enough said. John McCain, again, who was by that time past his sell-by date. Mitt Romney, who was simply, as an executive, very competent, very capable, but did not have, he simply regarded the Republican Party as too conservative. So along comes this red-blooded yodeler, Donald Trump. And one thing you've got to say about him, he did move and excite the party as much as anyone since Reagan. Well, certainly more than anybody since Reagan. My problems with Trump, such as they are, is that on many issues, Mr. Trump isn't really a Republican. He does things that Democrats would have been very comfortable with. Just before we get to the bottom of the hour, you say, well, what's an example of that? I'll give you an example. For at least 30 years, from at least the Nixon administration up to the advent of Trump, the Republican Party has been a party opposing tariffs, import taxes. The Republican Party has basically been an anti-tax party right along. Lower taxes, allow people to keep more of what they earn. Calvin Coolidge was saying it back in 1924. Ronald Reagan was winning landslide election victories with it in the 80s. President Trump campaigned on tax cuts and got elected and delivered those tax cuts. But on tariffs, he has taken the Democratic position. What is the Republican position? Well, fella sent me this. This is the Canadian province of Ontario is actually using they're spending money, $75 million, to produce this ad.
When someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs.
For those of you who don't recognize it, that is the actual recorded voice of Ronald Reagan.
And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs. Throughout the world, there's a growing realization that the way to prosperity for all nations is rejecting protectionist legislation and promoting fair and free competition. America's jobs and growth are at stake.
October of 1987, President Reagan gave that speech, and he was president at the time. This reflected the policy that he pursued during his time in office, a time that produced one of the three most prosperous decades of the 20th century. You look back over 100 years, from 1900 to 2000, 3 decades stand out as the 3 decades of prosperity, the 3 best: the 1920s, the 1950s, and the 1980s were the 3 most prosperous decades of the 20th century. It is worth noting that in all 3 of those decades, Republican administrations were in office. It is the bottom of the hour. Let's grab a ad package, and we'll be back presently with looking for our second phone call of the day, 831-265-5050.
Treehouse dispenses not only the finest cannabis products, but information to those who want to know how to use cannabis for maximum benefit. Hello, I'm Jenna. If you would like to know how best to use cannabis, ask your friends and neighbors at Treehouse Dispensary, 3651 Soquel Drive. If you're 21 plus with a valid ID, no appointment is necessary and the information is free. Order online at ourtreehouse.io and pick up at our drive-thru. See you soon.
The weather will change. Knox Roofing here. We all remember the little pigs. We all know the third pig hired Knox Roofing to do his roof. Every day he crawls into his home knowing no wind, no earthquake, fire, or even the big bad wolf can hurt his house. The weather will change for the good and sometimes not so good. Have a Knox roof installed on your home, and one thing you can be certain of, good security. I promise you that. The number to call is 461-0634. Thanks, folks.
I've got a question for you. Do you want a lower car payment just by making a phone call? You know, most people buy a car and they pay our dealer says their interest rate is, and they forget about it and make payments. But did you know there is a secret in your contract that allows another company to refinance any car payment to try and lower it? It's true. There is indeed a company out there that knows the ins and, more importantly, the outs on car loans, and they know how to lower your current car payment easy and fast. Make this free call right now and find out if you could lower your existing car payment. Call the Car Savings Hotline right now. The call is free.
Call now, 800-471-4435, 800-471-4435, 800-471-4435. That's 800-471-4435.
And once again, we are live on the Charles Freedman radio program, reachable by you at 831-265-5050. We've talked for the last few minutes about the conservative movement, its problems, and how British conservatives have failed to keep faith with conservatism. America's Republicans have done a slightly better job in certainly rejecting the Bush Romney leftist version of republicanism. Not that, these people were certainly better than the people running against them. Romney would have been a far better president than Barack Obama ever dreamed of being, and certainly wouldn't have done the stupid things that Obama did, like that idiotic deal with Iran. Nevertheless, the Mitt Romneys of the world were incapable of articulating the reformist desire that many Americans felt, and for this reason, Mr. Trump stepped into a political vacuum that had been created, and the rest is history. But it's important that we focus, if you're talking about parties that are in trouble, how about the left? In Great Britain, the current crisis is not benefiting the Labour Party. The Labour Party, rather, instead, is hemorrhaging support. And one of the reasons is because people who were traditional Labour voters would just never could possibly vote Conservative, but they don't feel that way about reform. They don't have that antipathy toward reform. They're willing to vote for them. The next general election is going to be an overwhelming parliamentary victory for the Reform Party. And this is going to be a wonderful thing for Great Britain because the Reform Party represents conservatism in Britain today. The Conservatives having given it up. Now, what about the Democrats in America? We talked about the Labour Party in England. They're not doing well at all. And they're in power. People are watching their performance and they're going, ew. Well, this is essentially what happened with Joe Biden. They watched him and they went, ew. There is a struggle for the soul of the Democratic Party going on. On the one hand are Democrats, Kennedy, Carter, Clinton, those Democrats. Used to be that was what the Democrats were. It was a center-left, pro-capitalist, pro-America, very patriotic party. The Democrats were every bit as adept at flag-waving as the Republicans. One of the things that unified all of us was our love of America. Democrat, Republican alike. When the flag came by, we saluted. And we meant it. The Democratic Party today is being taken over by people who do not like America. We've got a caller. Oh, it's Phil. Let's find out what's on his mind today. Grab the headphones and say hello. Hi, Phil. Thank you for calling.
Hi, Charlie. I have a serious topic and a light topic. So let's get the serious out of the way first.
All right.
Okay. Alluding back to what you were discussing in the previous half hour about Ukraine. Now, tell me if I have my history wrong. When Bill Clinton was president, we gave the Ukrainian assurance that if they gave up their nuclear weapons, we would defend them. I don't think it was a signed treaty, but it was a commitment. And how serious do we need to be in honoring our commitments? I think we need to be serious or we lose credibility. So, those who are saying we're wasting our money on Ukraine because they're not really democratic and they're not worthy of our support. Well, what about that prior commitment?
Well, you're absolutely correct. And this is part of the great disaster of post-war American foreign policy. After President Reagan left office, he was replaced by small-minded men who, when the impact of Reagan's policies led to the fall of the Soviet Union, were incapable of winning the peace. Rather than firmly cementing Russia into the West. Which, you say that? What about a tall order? Yeah, but you just won a damn war. That's what you get to do. At the end of World War II, we did not allow Germany and Japan to go right back to their old ideas. Rather, instead, we reformed their institutions. This would have been, granted, we didn't blast the living hell out of Russia in the course of the war, the way we did with Japan and Germany. Nevertheless, their travail, their economic collapse, was every bit as complete as what you saw in, for example, Weimar Germany. People couldn't get basic necessities. The opportunity was there to fix this, but now that's another story. You point out that President Clinton gave assurances to the Ukrainians: if you return the nuclear weapons that Russia had stationed on your soil, if you give them back to the Russians, we will guarantee your security. Yes, Mr. Clinton did say that. And, of course, you say, well, at the time he said that, Russia was not under the leadership of some crazed nationalist like Vladimir Putin, who was determined to spend millions, literally, of lives reestablishing the Russian Empire over the bodies of. You get the picture. Anyway, the idea being that now the United States of America would want to directly engage with Russia. I haven't heard anybody say that. President Trump certainly is not interested in doing that. Mr. Reagan, during his 8 years in office, was never interested in getting engaged in a direct confrontation with the Soviet Union, with the Russian Empire. This is not a good idea. This is why it's so tragic that during Mr. Biden's administration, his feckless conduct actually essentially green-lighted the invasion of Ukraine and began this conflict. Once it starts, it's like a phosphorus fire. It's almost impossible to put out.
Mm-hmm.
We have been doing, I think, a good job of maintaining Ukraine. I would, if it were me, I would be doing more. I would be doing more in the way of economic sanctions. I would be doing more in terms of the weaponry I gave to Ukraine to fight the battle. I'm not the president. Mr. Trump is. He is at least not turning his back on this situation. It looked for a few moments as if conceivably he might, but frankly, I never thought that I could see him doing that, and indeed, he has not. And as time has gone by, I think he has become more and more determined that some kind of an acceptable solution will come, particularly because he's been essentially strung along and lied to by Vladimir Putin, which he doesn't really care for.
He should have recognized that earlier in the game. I thought he was a better strategist than that Putin was going to play him.
I agree, but I don't know. There's just so much to it. I will be honest with you. I am much less willing to criticize Putin for his foreign policy strategies than I was before the victory in the Israeli-Iran war. When I saw Mr. Trump first be willing to use military action when it was necessary, and second, then be capable of bringing together an incredible coalition of previously disparate parties to compel Hamas to surrender hostages and agree to essentially lay down their arms, which now they're trying to renege on, but they won't be able to. Once I've seen something like this, I am willing to be a little bit more tolerant, a little bit more accepting, and say, okay, well, maybe this guy really does know what the hell he's doing. Let's give him a few more days, a few more weeks, and see what happens.
Yeah, interestingly enough, mentioning that, there is a striking difference. We participate in two different Jewish temples in this area. One is Reform, which is kind of a liberal form of Judaism. The other is Chabad, which is a very strict fundamentalist type of Judaism. And I've interacted with people in both places. The Chabad Jews are not only overwhelmingly conservative. To them, Trump is a hero for what he accomplished in the last few weeks. Whereas in the Reform Temple, most of the members are so left-wing that they can't see anything Trump does as positive because they're so enraged about him.
Mm-hmm. Which of the congregations is the larger?
The Reform one is larger, but that's not really a fair comparison because the Chabad is not appealing to a lot of people, including to some extent myself, because the services are long, they're mainly in Hebrew, and they can get quite boring unless you have a really good attention span. Whereas the Reform services are about an hour and a quarter. They're interesting. They're mainly in English. So naturally, they're going to attract more of the average Americans than the Chabad. I guess, I don't know what the equivalent would be in Christianity, but I know there are some very strict Baptist sects, for example, where the requirements and the rules are more rigorous than in some of the other churches. And so it's not fair to compare memberships.
Okay, I understand. That makes good sense.
Say it again?
I said I understand. That makes good sense.
Yeah, it's not really a fair question to ask because there's the religious commitment aspect of it. It's not about politics so much. It strikes me how different. If you mingle with one crowd and then you mingle with the other, you realize this is like a red city and a blue city.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But for anyone out there who thinks Jews as a whole are just liberals, they should come to one of these Chabads and see the support for Trump, which is very deep and very thorough.
Well, if he were running for president of Israel right now, I think he'd win.
Oh yeah, I think so. Although there's division there as well.
Obviously, but
yeah.
Mr. Trump has tremendous support among the Israeli people.
Yes.
Now you mentioned
you want to move.
You mentioned you had
to the
something.
lighter topic?
Yeah, sure. You had something else there. What is it?
Okay, I haven't watched the Wheeler and Woolsey movies yet, but you inspired me to do a little research, and I found something that will be of great interest to you and to your listeners. In seeking some rare stuff, I stumbled across a place called Archive. I think it's archive.com. It's based in San Francisco. This is a library of obscure movies, television, and books. It is partly, I believe, funded by the Library of Congress. They actually give guided tours on Friday afternoon, which if I lived in your area, I would definitely want to see. And I found stuff on there, besides Wheeler and Woolsey, I found stuff on there that I've never seen available elsewhere. There was, for example, a TV show that I thought was excellent drama that was canceled quickly in 1991. It was called My Life and Times, and it starred Helen Hunt. And the premise of that show was it's 2035 and you're flashing back on 1991. So it introduces you to the future, but mainly talks about the past. It's really tight, well-written, 30-minute shows. Only 9 were made, and it's never been available on a DVD or a VHS or Laserdisc or anything. They have them all, and you can download them. So I started with that project last night. I downloaded all 9 episodes and watched one of them with my wife, and I highly recommend it. It only take you like 3 or 4 hours to watch the whole kit and caboodle, but I think it would be worth your time to find it there and download it and watch them. They're so well written.
Well, thanks for the tip. Archive.org?
I think it's .com. I will double check that and get back to you, but they not only are they in San Francisco, they give explicit directions on how to get there with you take Caltrain and bus number 38, and you get off at such and such a corner in San Francisco and walk. They are like encouraging you to come and explore. So,
well, here's Internet Archive. Is that the same thing or something different?
Let me see. Well, no, I can't do this because I'm on a cell phone now.
Oh, okay.
I will check back. I'll check back with you tomorrow to make sure. I think I might have sent you an email with the link. If you check your email, and if I didn't, I will report back on that tomorrow.
Okay. Obscure TV. Must be it.
I think so.
Okay. Okay, archive.org. My Life and Times.
Oh, it is .org. It is .org. Okay. Yeah, and that's just even one example of the millions of things they have archived there.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. I'm sure there's plenty of people listening right now who are glad for the Internet Archive. That's what we're talking about here.
And if they all bring it up at once, it might crash the site. But maybe you don't have quite that many listeners.
I'm sure I don't. Well, thank you very much.
If this had been the Rush Limbaugh show, it would crash the site for sure.
Quite possibly. Yeah, quite possible. Well, again, thank you very much, Phil. I appreciate it.
Okay, very good. Have a good one.
You too. Have a great one. Bye-bye. Well, that's interesting. And, yeah, I see his point about how, getting back to the more deeper topic, if you're going to give guarantees, you should be very careful about it. It's like, when you give your word or you make a pledge to somebody, I've heard it said of somebody, he doesn't give his word lightly. That's a smart thing, because what that means is that you're dealing with somebody who understands the significance of it, understands that giving your word really means something, and that unless you're prepared to follow that through, you should refrain. don't make that pledge if you're not prepared to keep it. Well, I'm going to take advantage of these last few minutes. We were talking about the effectiveness and survival of political parties, and I was talking about the fact that Democrats have a problem. We don't mean Donald Trump. The arguably bigger danger is the socialist insurgency building in their own party. And the latest test of this is Zoran Mondani and the New York mayor's race. Republicans might want to hold off on the gloating. Mondani's just 33 years old. He's just a kid. He's leading in the race. He won the Democratic primary as a proud member of the Democratic Socialists of America. Andrew Cuomo, who lost the primary, is running as an independent. He's closed the gap a bit, but Mondani still is ahead by double digits. Mondani is a talented political performer. He's benefited from having unpopular opponents. This is what I was going to mention a little while ago. Nationally, the Democrats, the Democratic establishment, the Democratic, whatever you want to call it, has fought off the Bernie Sanders, Zoran Mondani group of people. How have they done it? Well, they've come up with their own candidates. Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden. Now, if you're at the moment saying, oh boy, well, I think you have every right to say that and think that. There probably were on the debate stage in 2016 and 2020 when there were a lot of Democrats seeking the nomination, most of whom you never heard of. Tulsi Gabbard, for God's sake, was among them. What if the Democrats had nominated her? Well, for one thing, she'd have won the election. In 2020, when she ran, if she'd have been the Democratic candidate against Donald Trump, she'd have beat the bejesus out of him. And she never would have governed this country the way Joe Biden did. And she obviously would never have been non compos mentis. What I'm saying here is basically, if you're going to go into a political contest, you need a leader. I've got a phone call, so the word is I do these right off the bat. So I've got Jerry here. Hello, Jerry.
Hello to you as well. The Internet Archive, we talked about that about 10 days ago as a source for old radio.
That's right.
And it's also an excellent source for your 78 RPM music. You can, again, do a Google search for a particular song or a particular band, and then just put archive on the end of your search, then you'll hit it.
Thanks for the tip. Sounds good. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah. Okay. Well, here we are. 70 RPM and Cylinder Records. Let's see what it does. 310,000 results. That's a chunk. Okay. So I see. Well, yeah, this definitely deserves a bit of... Oh, there's Kurt Nauk. I'm familiar with him.
You'll get lost.
Yeah, you're right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Very good. Adios.
And to you, sir. Thank you. Okay, we've got a good tip there. And let me see. Yeah, I've got about 3 minutes left. I'm going to conclude this peroration if I can. This Mamdani character is, really problematic. He wants to freeze the rent of the city's 1 million rent-stabilized apartments. This would mean that owners would not invest in maintenance, much less build more. If his young voters think housing is unaffordable now, wait until there's a rent freeze. And he's come up with these ideas like make free buses and subway, $700 million. He wants the city to own and run grocery stores. This would hurt bodega and small shop owners. the city would be directly competing with independent businessmen. He's tried to downplay his previous hostility to police. This isn't ancient history. He called the NYPD wicked and corrupt. Now he wants to shift money from policing to a Department of Community Safety that promises on restorative justice. This sounds like what has already produced a blizzard of crime in New York City streets. And it's the kind of thing, getting back a few minutes ago, I talked about San Francisco having elected Mayor Lurie. This is the kind of thing that San Francisco has now turned its back on. They've said no. They have said no. So they came up with Daniel Lurie, a capable, competent guy. Hadn't been a politician, he'd been a businessman. Once again, I'm characterizing this fellow as a Republican. In every conceivable way, he is a Republican. He's just has to run as a Democrat in San Francisco because those are the political realities. What Democrats nationally need to do is come up with an effective, competent leader. And they've already, one of the best ones they might have had was Tulsi Gabbard. They've driven her out of the party. She's become a Republican. It'll be interesting to see how many other real Democrats wind up saying, if this party is going to become a socialist party, a semi-communist party, I'm not hanging out. I'm gone. I'll move over before I'll do that. Don't laugh. That's what Tulsi Gabbard did. And she is one bright and talented woman. Perhaps this is what the future holds for the Democratic Party. It will become, instead of a center-left party, a radical left party, and a party that, again, does not salute the flag when it goes by, but rather instead regards it as an appalling symbol of all kinds of awful things. Can America survive that? I guess we'll get a chance to find out. You will, I won't, I'll be dead. It is now 11 o'clock. I'll be back in 6. Oh, for God's sakes, you kidding me? All the great records he has, and this is the drivel he chooses to post. I'm sorry. Too much drip. Ha ha ha. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back. Charles Freedman here with hour number 3 of today's program. It'd be 11:06, and time for hour number 3 to commence. Grand time to make your phone call. 831-265-5050 is the number. 831-265-5050. Just got an email from Sleepy John Sandage, one of my fellow programmers here at Santa Cruz Voice. The other day, John Sanders is one of those people, one of those rare individuals. He's even older than I am. And he sent me online a whole bunch of things. I get these from various people. Remember back in the day, they're kind of nostalgia-oriented. This was an exceptionally good group of them. One of them was, if you recognize this, you're old. And what was it a picture of? At motion picture theaters, they used to have drive-in movies. And when you went to the drive-in movie, there'd be a post, and on it, this speaker with a wire. And what you did was you took the speaker and hung it on the window of your car, and there's a volume control on it. And this is how you got the sound. Obviously, if they're projecting a film on a big screen at the far end of a huge parking lot. How are you going to get the sound? Well, you have these individual speakers. Now, in the 80s, I guess, or 90s, they did away with these, and they instead had them on the radio broadcast. You'd turn on your car radio and get the sound that way. And, of course, nowadays, there are no drive-in theaters at all anymore. So there was this, and there were a lot of other pictures and things that were on this. The one that moved me the most, it was a picture of kids playing in the street. Kids on their bikes and like that. And I could look at this, and I was one of those kids. And the caption, I can't remember the exact words it said, but we didn't know how wonderful this was. We took it for granted. This was our life every day. We didn't know how wonderful this was, and we didn't know that we were the last ones. And I started thinking about that. Thinking about the way kids grow up nowadays, glued to cell phones and things like that. We played outdoors. And can Brian come out and play? Can Charles come out and play? This was everyday life. And our parents said, okay, go ahead, go on outside. And they'd expect us back at, around 5:30, 6, when it was about time for dinner. But in the meantime, we were out cruising around, having fun. I think parents who did that with their kids nowadays, well, I've read stories about how a parent, go to the store and get me something, walk home. And the next thing you know, the parent is being denied their kid. The kid's being taken away because the parent is irresponsible. I mean, please, Mr. Hemingway. Well, I wrote back to Sleepy John. I said, thanks, Juan Dormio, Sleepy John. That's a little joke of ours. For these stumbles down memory lane, every single one resonates, but the one about being the last. Kids just don't get to do the stuff we did every day, like riding my bike to school with nobody bugging me about a stupid helmet. I rode my bike back and forth every day to school. It was probably the better part of a mile each way. And my mom would say, okay, well, here's your lunch bucket. See you when you get home. Off I go. And this was ubiquitous. All the kids rode their bikes to school. John C. Fremont School, I don't think they even had school buses. I don't recall any. Certainly never rode. I never saw a school bus till I came over here. Salsapuedes had school buses. Anyway, so I got a note back from him today. He says, the stupid helmets are the least of our worries. How about the electrified bicycles doing 30 miles an hour on West Cliff Drive on a pedestrian path? Now, a number of years ago, I lived on the west side of Santa Cruz, and every morning I used to get up and jog along the West Cliff Drive pedestrian path. I'd jog to the lighthouse. I'd go around the lighthouse and come back, and I did it with my car one time, looking at the odometer. It was a mile each way. So every morning I jogged 2 miles. I was in pretty good shape in those days. But 2 miles is no big deal. But I wouldn't try to do it right now. Let me put it that way. Anyway, the West Cliff Drive pedestrian path is something that I have used. There were people walking on it. There were people jogging on it. There were even occasionally people riding bicycles on it. But these were not electric bicycles, and they certainly were not motorcycles. Nobody had his Harley Davidson on the West Cliff Drive pedestrian path. So Sleepy John is telling me now about electrified bicycles doing 30 miles an hour on the West Cliff Drive pedestrian path. I think you should get more irritated about that and even bring it up on your show. We could get it changed and know what happens. Looking forward to seeing you. He's absolutely right. I mean, I can't imagine somebody drives an electrified bus. This is a motorcycle. Motorcycles belong on the street with traffic, not on the sidewalks. And this pedestrian path, essentially, this is a sidewalk. This is where people walk. And the fact that evidently in 2025 there are people who were too boneheaded to understand that, and the authorities, I mean, there are police officers. Surely, if Santa Cruz police are cruising West Cliff and they see some nut with a motorcycle on the pedestrian path, they're going to, flag the guy down and say, hey, Murgatroyd, don't do this. Go play in the traffic where you belong. Get out of here. They might not necessarily give him a ticket. I'm not advocating, any kind of, what should I say, draconian action. But usually, for normal, I guess once again, this tells you something about my period of time. A talking to by a police officer is usually sufficient for most people to get the idea and comply. If anything, they're grateful for not getting a ticket, and they decide to obey. I just happen to think of a personal example. Over at Freedom Rite Aid, it used to be my habit, if I was just going to dash in, pick up something, and dash out, and that was usually it. I knew what I wanted. I was going to go zit, in and out within a minute, 2 minutes at the most. So I'd park right in front of the door. Well, right in front of the door is a fire zone. It's a red curb. But I'd park there. Well, this one time I came out, and sure enough, there was an officer about to ticket my car. And I said, officer, you can't have been here very long. I was only leaving it there for a moment. He said, well, it's a red curb. I'm sorry, but that's... I said, I'll tell you what. I'll make a deal with you. You put your ticket book away, and I will never park here again. Ever. And you know what he did? He said, okay, you got a deal. And I'll tell you what. I continued to do business at that place for years after that until it closed down recently. And I never, ever parked in that fire zone again. Not even once. But that's, I shouldn't have done it in the first place, admittedly. But, cop and I saw each other eye to eye. He accepted my pledge, and I lived up to it. Used to be that was the way things were done. Oh, well. Anyway, thank you, Sleepy John, for pointing out that people are driving their motorcycles on West Cliff Drive pedestrian path. I find it hard to believe, but I do not doubt your veracity, not even for one split second. If you say it, you've seen it. And yes, I agree with you. This is unconscionable. Now, during this third hour, we might get into a few other signs, OD times. Here's a piece. This has nothing really to do with politics, but it kind of captured my attention. Vitaly Katsenelson? Hell of a name, isn't it? Now, this guy is CEO and Chief Investment Officer of Investment Management Associates, so he's a money manager. He's writing, this happened in Denver, Colorado. When I was invited recently to tour an Amazon distribution center in Denver with a few colleagues, I jumped at the opportunity. Like most people, I order regularly from Amazon, but have never seen the machinery behind those quick deliveries. I was curious about the logistical marvel that could get a package from click to doorstep, sometimes in a few hours. So that initial paragraph captured my interest. I thought, now, I don't order from Amazon that much. I think the only times I have are, at Christmas time I'll order a gift for somebody, and it'll come from Amazon, and I'll have them send it to the person. But under normal circumstances, Amazon and I are strangers. This is not the case with my wife. So I've seen the trucks and like that. And the idea of, well, how does all this work? Sounded interesting. What I expected was impressive efficiency and scale. What I found was more remarkable and unsettling than I had imagined. So what are we going to do? We're going to look at an Amazon shipping center. The distribution center's job is straightforward. Receive goods from suppliers, sort and store them, then fulfill customer orders by packaging items and loading them onto trucks. This particular center wasn't responsible for final delivery. It sends already labeled packages to smaller centers closer to customers, which then hand them off to UPS, the post office, or Amazon's own deliveries. First thing that hits you is the noise. The conveyor belts running through the factory are so loud that we needed headsets to protect our hearing. The building is enormous, about 1 million square feet, roughly 20 football fields. That scale is astonishing. In my mind's eye, I'm looking at that huge warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they put the crate with the ark and it backs up and up and up and up, and it's just into the distance. Well, that's how big this warehouse is. It's divided into 3 distinct areas. The perimeter is a lit walkway that allows goods to flow in and out of the building. About 1/3 of the center looks like a normal warehouse where humans work, but the largest portion of the facility is dark, except for the light that leaks over from adjacent zones. This is where inventory is stored on thousands of yellow shelves, each 5 feet square at the base and 8 feet tall. The robots swarming around look like electric, orange, self-driving lawnmowers in a coordinated dance, giving one another the right of way. They slide under shelves, lift them a few inches, and ferry them around in this dark area. A fence separates the dark zone from the rest of the facility. This protects humans from robots and the inventory from humans. Only specially trained employees can enter when equipment malfunctions or an item falls off a shelf. Unlike at Home Depot, where knives are with knives and bolts are with bolts, almost all the inventory here is stored on shelves scattered throughout these dark zones, completely at random. Amazon's computers keep track of millions of items across thousands of shelves. They not only know which shelf contains which item, but exactly where it's placed on that shelf. All human interaction within the shelves happens at this DMZ, the boundary between the light and dark zones, where loading and picking stations are located. At loading stations, employees take merchandise from yellow bins and place it onto shelves for storage. At picking stations, they retrieve merchandise from shelves and put it onto yellow bins. Both stations look similar, and there are hundreds of them. Each is staffed by one employee who follows, get this now, pictorial instructions on several overhead screens. For loading, he might see a visual instructing him to take an item from bin 2 and place it on the right side of shelf level 5. If he is picking, the computer might tell him to take the item pictured from the middle of shelf level 4 and put it into bin 5. A light shines on the correct one of the 5 numbered bins in front of the employee. Now, having just read that, now you're trying to visualize this. I'm going to go through it again. Each is staffed by one employee who follows pictorial instructions on several overhead screens. For loading, he might see a visual instructing him to take an item from bin 2, place it on the right side of shelf level 5. If he's picking, the computer might tell him to take the item pictured from the middle of shelf level 4 and put it into bin 5. Shines one of the 5 numbered bins in front of the employee. Okay, now you've heard it twice. Now maybe you're beginning to visualize it. Do you know what I see? Have you ever seen Metropolis? Fritz Lang's silent masterpiece. It was made and released in the greatest of all years, 1927. And it depicts a futuristic world in which the creative people, the managers, etc., who live in these tall buildings, they get to see the sun, but the proletarians working the machines underneath are, live in perpetual underground. Anyway, one of the scenes, and this crops up several times in the movie, there are men who serve this giant machine. Imagine, if you will, a great circle, kind of like a doorway. And there's a man standing in front of it. And the circle is large enough to where he stands in the middle. He could reach out and almost touch the edges with his arms. His head's up here. Around this circle are lights placed at, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. All these lights around the edge. Under each arm is an arrow. So he has an arrow in his right hand that he swings around, up and down, and an arrow in his left hand that he swings up and down. Are you following this? Now, what happens? Around the edge of this circle, a light will shine. Immediately, the worker hoists the arrow up to where the light is. On his other side, on the left side, another light will shine. Again, the same thing. The worker takes the arrow that he has on his left hand and points it at the light. Again, on the right side, a light shines. In one of the other places, the arrow is moved. On the left side, a light shines. The arrow is moved. And this is what the worker does for a shift. Let me read the next paragraph here. Where are we? I'm in the wrong place. Multiple cameras monitor the employees' movements, recording where each item is placed. Computers track the time it takes to load or unload each item, and a single screen displays the employees' statistics. Amazon has gamified the process so that pickers and loaders can compete against one another using their times as inputs. Every hour, the computer interrupts the workflow to provide short, guided stretching exercises. First, you read how it works, then you read how it's monitored. And again, Fritz Lang's dystopian world comes to my mind. As I talked about this distribution center with my colleagues, I remarked that the dark side of the fence, where the robots roam, looked dystopian, like something out of Black Mirror. A colleague offered a more chilling assessment. It's the humans that look dystopian. He was right. Employees work 4 10-hour shifts, so they have a 10-40 work schedule. Upside, every weekend is a 3-day weekend. But you spend 10 hours. They simply follow detailed computer instructions, mindlessly moving items from one place to another. It's just them and the yellow bins and the shelves. It's just them and the arrows and the lights. Holy smoke. As I read this, I thought to myself, well, Charles, what if you were holding one of those jobs? I don't know. In all fairness, it seems to me that Maybe the good news is that it doesn't require a tremendous amount of intellect to do this work. There's no creativity called for or even permitted. As we discussed automation with our guide, we learned this facility was a version 9, designed 10 years ago, 2015. Although I imagine the software running the automations is quite new. The newest fulfillment centers are version 13 with even more robots. It's easy to predict how this story will end. These distribution centers will go entirely dark, as robots don't need light. The only question is when it will happen. This facility is run by sophisticated algorithms housed in an Amazon Web Services facility hundreds of miles away. From the moment the order is placed, every decision is made by these algorithms, not artificial intelligence, but millions of lines of pre-programmed code. A software system decides which facility to send the order to. Once the order arrives, the lawnmower-like robots start moving shelves. The system then provides pictorial instructions to the humans on what to pick, where to place it, and which truck to load. One day soon, it's safe to predict most of the humans won't be necessary to run the distribution center. Robots will perform almost all tasks. People will be there only to troubleshoot edge cases. Today, this facility employs 3,100 people. Fully automated, combining robotics with AI-driven coordination, it may need only 100. What will the other 3,000 do? Well, my answer to that is they will do something more human. That's all I can say. They'll do something more human. Now, one thing that's not mentioned in here is what kind of wage these people are paid. I don't see any numbers in this piece at all. What is here is a description, to my mind, a harrowing, terrifying description of the work involved. Mind-numbing work. The fact that a person is only subjected to this regimen for 4 10-hour shifts in the course of a full week is the only redeeming circumstance that I can find here. I admit it's work that needs to be done. There's no question about that. But I would certainly hope that people who take these jobs do not do so as a career, that these jobs are viewed as temporary way stations by people who are on the way to something more rewarding. Robots that handle your Amazon orders. That's the title of this. And again, as I read it, the images of Metropolis were impossible for me to escape. Incidentally, if you've never seen Fritz Lang's Metropolis, Turner Classic Movies shows it every once in a while. It's movie's almost 100 years old, obviously long enough for original copies to have deteriorated. They have preserved virtually all of Metropolis. There's a few places where you'll see still images for a while. The original musical score exists. The movie lasts over 2 hours. It is not one of those little quickies. But if you've never seen it, you certainly should. And you'll find that the lack of a soundtrack, in the sense that the lack of recorded dialogue, is probably less noticeable in Metropolis than in a lot of other movies. And I'm a guy who likes recorded dialogue. I like talking pictures. This one is good enough to where you don't really miss it all that much. 11:32. It's time for some ads. Let's go ahead and do that. I'll be right back. In 2 minutes, I shall return, hopefully talking with you at 831-265-5050.
with a little help from our friends. Santa Cruz Voice would like to rent or lease an office in Mid-County or thereabouts for our hosts and their VIP guests to conduct interviews. We are looking for 200 square feet, give or take, with secure access, and are willing to share with an existing business that has an extra office to rent. If you know of such a space, please let us know at info@santacruzvoice.com. That's info@santacruzvoice.com. And thank you for being a friend.
Attention content producers. You can have access to a complete digital media production facility at Satellite Co-working and Digital Media Studio on Soquel Avenue. Easily rent video and audio equipment, a studio with green screen, editing suite, and audio booth, all at can't say no rates. Schedule a tour to see for yourself at satellitecoworking.com. Mention Santa Cruz Voice for 20% off your first reservation.
The wife says the boat's got to go, no problem. Stored at Anbar Self-Storage in U-Haul, easy off Highway 1 by the airport. 24-hour security for cars, boats, and RVs. Stored away at Anbar Self-Storage in U-Haul and Freedom.
You made the products, now you have to deliver. Anbar Self-Storage and U-Haul has the moving vans, shipping boxes, and packing materials you need to deliver them. Easy off Highway 1 on Airport Boulevard by the airport. Anbar Self-Storage and U-Haul in Freedom.
Get hooked up with affordable cannabis at your neighborhood Hook Outlet dispensary. We have locations in Santa Cruz, Capitola, and Watsonville. At each Hook Outlet, you will find unmatched low prices on the Hook's unparalleled selection of top-quality medical and recreational cannabis flower, vapes, drinks, gummies, and concentrates. The Hook Outlets are Santa Cruz County's best source for the finest cannabis at the lowest prices. See for yourself. Stop by any Hook Outlet and say hi. We'll see you there. HookOutlet.com.
It's 11:34. The final segment of today's Charles Freedman radio program is now coming your way. Join it if you wish. Become part of it if you wish. 831-265-5050 is the telephone number. There are few things that I thought we'd pretty much gotten rid of by the time we arrived at the 21st century. One of them was anti-Semitism. It seemed to me that in the wake of World War II, when people learned about the terror of the Holocaust, when people read the diary of Anne Frank, as we all did when we were kids, when people saw, as many have, the images taken at Auschwitz, Dachau, etc., the idea that people at one time attempted to exterminate the Jews from the face of the earth, that people who still retained some kind of antipathy or hatred for the Jewish people was simply off the charts. Such people were, well, you can't ride in our club car. Socially unacceptable. Kind of like, using racial slurs against black people nowadays. You don't do it. I have a record collection that proves that such language was once in common usage, say 100 years ago, a little more than 100 years ago. These were everyday terms. Nowadays, if you use them, you're regarded as a Philistine, simply beyond the pale. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing, because that type of language is destructive, hateful, harmful. For it to be suppressed by law is impossible in a country where we have freedom of speech. For it to be suppressed by pressure of peer group, of social approbation or social condemnation. This is what happens in a just society. something that is impermissible simply doesn't happen because people will turn away. They'll all move away from you on the Group W bench. One of the most appalling developments of the 21st century is the reemergence of anti-Semitism. And it seems to be based, as anti-Semitism has been in the past, on an ignorance that must be regarded as almost willful. Almost willful. Share something with you from Elisha Wiesel, a former chief information officer with Goldman Sachs, a founding partner of Clear Alpha Technologies, serves as chairman of the Elie Wiesel Foundation. Elie Wiesel, of course, is a Holocaust survivor whose foundation seeks to perpetuate the memory and the history of that tragedy and thereby make anti-Semitism continue to be socially unacceptable. Elisha Wiesel starts out with what sounds like a setup line. An Irishman and a Jew walk into a Japanese restaurant. It sounds like a joke setup, but there was nothing funny about this near-terminal event for our long-standing friendship. This vignette of being a Jewish New Yorker in 2025. The stark choice we'd be making between Zoran Mamdani and Andrew Cuomo, divisiveness or unity, loomed throughout. We talked, we laughed about travel, cycling, our loved ones. Then he asked, "Isn't it terrible where we've wound up in the Middle East?" I was still elated from the Israeli hostages' release the previous day. It took me a minute to realize he didn't share my relief. It's been a terrible war, I agreed, but I'm optimistic, thank God President Trump stood with Israel and took out the Iranian nuclear facilities. The Abraham Accords will grow from here. But who's going to force Israel to make peace? They're as bad as Hamas. We've discussed world affairs for 30 years. And I know he reads Howard Zinn and Noam Chomsky, but this was the first time I'd wondered if I'd misheard him. Are you really both sidesing this conflict? I asked, incredulous. Are you suggesting the rape, murder, and kidnapping by Hamas on October 7th, with Gazan civilian participation, is equivalent to Israel's defensive war? Zoran Mamdani's messaging has made class war and hatred of Jews great again. Smiling, polished, and articulate, Mr. Mamdani lies. He lies about Israel as easily he lies that he can freeze rent and offer free goods through higher taxes, as though the corporations and billionaires he targets can't simply relocate. New Yorkers are not dumb, but we are busy. Mr. Mamdani is lying to those too busy to learn the truth. His attack points: occupation, apartheid, genocide. The casualties: truth, friendships, coexistence for New York's Jews. Unlike Andrew Cuomo, he seeks to other us and divide the city. Mr. Mamdani blamed Hamas's butchery on the occupation. On October 8th, while Israel was reeling, he omitted that Israel pulled out of Gaza in 2005 and that Hamas built rockets and tunnels with billions in aid. Why couldn't Israel just accept the Balfour Declaration so many years ago, my friend asked. I took a breath. How much history was he missing? Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, belonged to Jordan after 1948. Jordan, warned to stand down in 1967, attacked anyway and lost the territory. I didn't add that an Al-Qassam rocket fired from Ramallah in the center of the West Bank could hit Jerusalem in 10 seconds. Israel's detractors rarely acknowledge its security concerns. Mr. Mamdani's apartheid charge also lies by omission. Members of Israel's 15% Arab minority have sat on its Supreme Court, run banks, and represented the country at Eurovision. They dominate medicine. The Islamic majority states around Israel are Judenrein, free of Jews, or nearly so. Can't you just be civilized, my friend said. It's so frustrating watching Israel mistreat the Palestinians. How many Jews live in Gaza? I asked. 0. Why, do you think? I don't know. Maybe they don't want to be there. The correct answer, they'd be killed. Ugliest and most dangerous of all, this October 7th, Mr. Mamdani accused Israel of genocide, normalizing the lie that Israel seeks destruction, not security. Elisha, tens of thousands of Gazans died, my friend said. Nothing is worth that. Genocide requires intent. The Nazis aim to annihilate all Jews. Israel's intent is to destroy Hamas, not Palestinians. Before October 7th, 18,000 Gazans worked in Israel every day. Mr. Mamdani knows this, even if my friend doesn't. After October 7th, Israel faced a terrible choice: destroy Hamas or face endless attacks. Hamas hides behind civilians. Israel drops leaflets and sends texts to cell phones before dropping bombs. So who is genocidal? Israel or Hamas? For me, this isn't theoretical, I said. My nephew, an infantry soldier, is sent into these booby-trapped tunnels whenever we can't use an airstrike. Does his life matter less? My friend was resolute. Your nephew signed up for this. Nobody else did. Mr. Mamdani's lies endanger Jews everywhere. Incendiary, false, and deadly, they spread hatred. More than half of New York's hate crimes last year were anti-Semitic. One attacker, shouting "Free Palestine," stabbed a Jew. Another tried to run Jews over with a car. I was assaulted last week by anti-Israel marchers at the kind of rally Mr. Mamdani attended, then encouraged, then endorsed only tacitly as he came under pressure. The signs read, "Glory to the martyrs. Violence is resistance. Kill the Jews." I'm voting for Andrew Cuomo. We need a uniter, not a divider. His support matters at a time when we feel so isolated. My friend and I left a restaurant, a seam of our friendship unraveling. "I'm sorry I can't be with you on this," he said. "That's okay. Jews have been alone for millennia. We're used to it." "Was it worth it? All this fighting?" he asked. His eyes said, "Do you think you're winning?" "Yes, we're still here." Hamas hoped Israel would crumble. But Israeli water condensation and waste management technology are saving lives, turning haters in Syria into new allies. My Israeli nephew is back in medical school. He'll be a doctor like his father and grandfather, healing Jews and Arabs alike. My niece will give birth in December. We love life so much. Ruth Vissa told me recently that the Jewish superpower is coexistence. As individuals and a nation, we look to encourage abundance, whether economic, cultural, or spiritual. Mr. Cuomo champions that ethos. With the city under his leadership, the Jewish community will stand unafraid, contributing the best of ourselves, along with every other precious commodity, to the melting pot that is our beloved New York. It is scary how effective and how pervasive disinformation can be. And of course, in a free country such as the one we live in, you cannot make these things illegal. Can't pass a law. No, the only way to fight lies is with truth. And I'm continually reminded of the words of Mark Twain: "A lie can make it around the world before the truth gets its boots laced." That is, unfortunately, still the fact. 11:47. Telephone calls still welcome on today's program. 831-265-5050 is the number, and there is still plenty of time for you to call in and ask your question, make your presentation, your comment, whatever. Happy to hear from you. Earlier today, we talked a little about the news media and how a major reform was absolutely necessary to reclaim news media from what they have become. Holman Jenkins writes a little bit about the politics of it. I made the point that years ago, the news media forced the issue on Watergate at a time when Nixon actually had committed transgressions that were justly brought to light. Today, the transgressions are on the other side, and the media is willfully suppressing them. If Richard Nixon had been a Democrat, he would have finished his second term. The Biden administration's case against Donald Trump for purloining classified documents should have gone to trial. The best case on the evidence and law, it was also an opportunity for Mr. Trump to offer a jury nullification defense to justify his actions as needed to expose the abuses of America's intelligence agencies. On the White House driveway the other day, defending his administration's prosecution of Obama FBI Director James Comey, President Trump said the lawfare waged against him, "You can't let this happen in a country." The applause from America's wise men and women would have been deafening if someone else had said these words. Cheering would have been the sainted Leon Panetta, former congressman, defense secretary, and CIA chief. That is, if Mr. Panetta hadn't himself knowingly joined with other senior officials in lying about the Hunter Biden laptop. "I have been critical of Comey in the past," began a New York Times headline, as if it were a strain to reconcile disapproving Mr. Comey's actions with disapproving Mr. Trump's actions. George Stephanopoulos of ABC News didn't find the courage to report honestly on the collusion hoax. He makes it up to himself by noisily calling Mr. Trump a rapist, for which his employer then pays Mr. Trump $16 million. This week, Stephanopoulos is busy plumping a 1982 Bruce Springsteen anxiety attack into news to promote parent company Disney's biopic. Why am I telling you this? Because it's a giant opportunity for the Democrats. The mortality tables will have to fix the nation's newsrooms. Barry Weiss can't do it. The mortality tables will have to fix the nation's newsrooms. Now, the current crop of agentized pseudo-journalists will have to simply grow old and die, or retire, or whatever will clear them out to make room for something else. But history practically begs America's out-of-power party to revive itself so it can provide a counterbalance to Trump. And the place to start is by understanding what a menace media cowardice has become to our politics, how corrupting for Democrats particularly. To summarize a useful Times survey of the country's failing second party last week, is opposition to Mr. Trump all Democrats have got? Unless they get unexpected help from a collapsing economy, no kings isn't going to be enough. Mr. Trump will be confirmed in his course by GOP victory in the midterms. Even Trumplicans should understand politics as well enough to know there's trouble when a president and his supporters are too unrestrained. It would be a revolution. But Democrats could take a leaf from Mr. Trump, who ran by identifying real issues. How's he doing on these? Deterring China? De-risking the Ukraine war for the U.S.? Fixing immigration rather than terrifying immigrants? Trump spokesman at least acknowledged fiscal reality, even as they pinned fanciful hopes on tariffs, crypto, revaluing federal land and gold holdings at current prices. Democrats? They'll be celebrating the crystal anniversary of the perpetual Obama-Mamdani dodge. Everything is affordable if billionaires just pay their fair share. And yet respect-worthy Democratic leaders also exist. They're to be found in gubernatorial offices around the country, largely unseen by a national audience because they preserved their dignity in the Trump era by not engaging in the panting, reckless opportunism of an Adam Schiff. Obviously, these governors do not include Mr. Pritzker of Illinois or Mr. Newsom of California, or that demented woman up in Oregon. But there are plenty of other, I think there's something like 20 Democratic governors altogether, maybe 21. And many of them are quite capable individuals. None are perfect, and yet any number might finesse the unspoken disaster now in the party's relationship with the broad electorate. This disaster is less Democratic culpability for returning Mr. Trump to the White House than culpability for failing to give Americans even someone to vote for in 2024. For leaving Mr. Trump as an untrammeled colossus almost fated to use his powers excessively and unwisely. You know, as I read that, you get the idea that perhaps Holman Jenkins has bought into the idea that Mr. Trump promotes, that he won a landslide victory in last year's national election. He won the popular vote by 2 points, and the electoral vote by 300 and some to 200 and some. This was an election as close as 1976, which at the time was regarded as a cliffhanger. Jimmy Carter beat Gerald Ford 51 to 49, 2 points. The idea that President Trump's mandate rests on overwhelming popular support has never been true. And for him to act as if it does is politically dangerous. Trump's spokesman have at least acknowledged fiscal reality. I'm guessing many flyover Democrats have long seen the party's blunder in associating itself too closely with the national media, the self-defeating Russian hoax, the shameless, unnecessary politicization of COVID. Both helped Mr. Trump. The most damning was the conniving of Team Biden to push a senile, unpopular incumbent past voters a second time, even at the highly probable risk of returning Mr. Trump to the White House. A dramatic repentance isn't necessary or expected. Democrats can go a long way toward living down 2024 by ending their symbiosis with professional media cadavers like Mr. Stephanopoulos. It's a twofer. It would help with the America that reviles the media for lying about Trump. It also, the America that reviles the media for lying about Mr. Trump so stupidly that it helped him. For it defies the warp and rhythm of life to think Americans could ever trust such a leadership class again or bring it back to power in the post-Trump era. If Democrats don't understand this, America's next leadership class won't consist of Democrats. It will consist of Mr. Trump's political descendants and heirs. The country's natural opposition party has 12 months before the midterms to make this break and start redeeming itself in the eyes of non-coastal America. So far, it is not happening. If you were listening last Friday, you may remember that for once in a blue moon, I failed to get my Wall Street Journal, and instead I had to do my program without it. Well, wouldn't you know that in that particular edition I missed, there was something really, well, I guess you'd say kind of special. And this was a book review. Every day there's a thing, the bookshelf, and it's a book review. Sometimes they're very interesting. Evidently the one on Friday the 16th was tremendously so. The book was called Slow Poison. And Mitchell Muncy of Ashburn, Virginia writes, I just read parts of this review of Slow Poison twice because I thought either he or Professor Mahmoud Mamdani must be putting us on. Idi Amin as a founding father? That's the kind of imagination you find only at a place like Columbia. Perhaps for his next book, the professor can rehabilitate Joseph Mobutu. Evidently what I missed on Friday the 16th was a review of a book, a biography, a fawning biography of Idi Amin. For the younger among you, Idi Amin was for many years the dictator of the African nation, the East African nation of Uganda. Idi Amin was kind of the Jeffrey Dahmer of Africa. He kept parts of human beings in a refrigerator. The difference being Jeffrey Dahmer operated in the shadows, trying to make sure no one found out what he was up to. Idi Amin held dictatorial sway over a nation of hapless people, many of whom he turned into victims. Again, if this is a new name to you, if you have not heard of Idi Amin, IDI space AMIN, look him up. Don't do so if you've just eaten. But the thing I didn't realize until this morning was that evidently this ode to Idi Amin was written by Mahmoud Mamdani. That is the father of this smiling monster who will now be the next mayor of New York City. This is where he comes from. A home in which his, I guess sophomoric is a good way. Sophomore is a wise fool. You have to be fairly wise to be Columbia. Columbia is no place for dummies. But you have to be a fool to accept Idi Amin as anything other than a psychopathic monster. So, I got to admit, every once in a while I think, it can't get any worse. We've seen the absolute nadir of culture and everything else, and then something happens to remind me it can always slip down even from where we are. A biography of Idi Amin. Save your money. It is noon at Santa Cruz Voice. I'm Charles Freedman. Back tomorrow at 9:06. Have a nice afternoon. Mm-hmm. Oh, come on. Is it here? Nope. Where are you, babe? Oh, well, come on in.
All my little drill bits or screw bits. What about your drill bit?
Yours doesn't give me a great deal of confidence.
That's all right.
Hang on a second.
All right.
Be smooth.
Okay.
Walk next door. Next door. That's the start. Okay, so let me see that really.
So it's just, a little bit. I don't need a pointy one. I need one that's I need the one that to put the little screw in. Well, screw the screw in.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Well, I don't have it.
Yeah, you do.
No, I don't. I've got a drill index, but all it has in it is
See if I put it in there with it.
all right.
And I'm going to go and clip over here.
You do that. Oh. Okay, here we go. Hey! No, this is the only one that's in there. Kind of a hex thing. Did I? See, I have a hard time working up like symbols. How many times have I told you, put your toy... What? You found it? Well, put your toys away when you're through playing. And here. Put your toys away. Not my fault. I didn't do it. She's out here because I think she wants to. You know what she wants.
Uh-huh.
Oh, you found it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
but,
good.
but it doesn't have all the pieces that I know it must be.
All right, put them away.
Yeah.
Stick them in your... Okay. Oh, jeez. Oh, right. Oh, yeah, we're going to do that.